Queen Zixandra spent the next week watching humans work alongside her crew members. What she saw challenged everything she believed about the nature of intelligence and capability. Jake Morrison would sit with her engineers and suggest improvements to systems that had been perfected over millennia. Amy Chun taught Vorthic pilots maneuvers that should have been impossible with their ship designs. Kevin Brooks worked with military strategists to develop tactics that broke conventional rules of engagement. The humans did not seem to understand that certain things were supposed to be impossible. When her chief engineer explained that their fusion reactors could not be made more efficient because they had reached theoretical maximum output, Jake asked why they were limited by theory instead of trying new approaches. When her pilots insisted that certain flight patterns would destroy their ships, Amy demonstrated how slight modifications could make the impossible become routine. They think differently, General Folkmar observed during one of their private conferences. Where we see barriers, they see starting points. The Queen nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand that humans did not accept the concept of absolute limits. Every boundary they encountered became a challenge to overcome, rather than a fact to acknowledge. Have you noticed how they respond to failure? They celebrate it, the general replied with confusion in his voice. Yesterday, Jake attempted to solve an energy distribution problem and failed completely. He seemed delighted and immediately began planning a different approach. Because failure gives them information, Zixandra realized. They do not see it as an ending, but as a step toward success. This insight was interrupted by urgent alarms throughout the ship. Commander Velthis appeared on the communication screen, her crystalline features displaying unprecedented distress. My queen, we have received word from the homeworld. The stellar archive is collapsing. The Queen felt something cold settle in her core processes. The stellar archive was not just any star system. It was the heart of Vorthic civilization, containing the accumulated knowledge and cultural heritage of their entire species. More than that, it was home to 40 billion of her people. How long do we have? She asked. Our scientists estimate 6 days before the star goes nova. The gravitational distortions are already preventing the evacuation ships from reaching the inner planets. Jake Morrison appeared beside her, having overheard the emergency. What's a stellar archive? Our homeworld system, the Queen replied, surprised at how easily she shared this information with an alien. The star is collapsing in a way our scientists say cannot be stopped. 40 billion lives will be lost. Can I see the data? Queen Zixandra hesitated. The information contained details about Vorthic technology and population centers that no outsider had ever seen. But something about Jake's calm determination made her decision for her. Show him everything. For the next 3 days, Jake studied the stellar collapse data with an intensity that amazed the Queen's scientists. He asked questions that revealed a deep understanding of physics, despite his species' primitive technology. Amy and Kevin joined him, along with several human specialists who had been transported from Earth. They worked without sleep, consuming vast amounts of information while scribbling notes on primitive paper tablets. It's not a natural collapse, Jake announced on the 3rd day. Something is destabilizing the star from multiple points simultaneously. If we can identify the source points and create counter-resonances, we might be able to stabilize it. Dr. Velther, the Queen's chief scientist, examined Jake's calculations with growing amazement. The mathematics are sound, but the energy requirements would be enormous. We would need to coordinate gravitational pulses from at least 12 different positions around the star, each time to the nanosecond. That's impossible, another scientist added. The distances involved mean we cannot communicate quickly enough to maintain synchronization. Even light-speed signals would introduce fatal delays. Jake smiled with the expression the Queen had learned meant he was about to attempt something unprecedented. Not if we don't rely on communication. How can you coordinate without communication? General Thokmar demanded. By predicting what each position needs to do and trusting everyone to do their part at exactly the right time, Jake replied. It's like a dance where all the dancers know the music but can't hear each other. The Queen's advisors protested that such coordination was impossible. Without real-time communication, there was no way to adjust for unexpected variables or correct timing errors. The entire plan depended on everything working perfectly the first time, which violated every principle of safe engineering. Sometimes you have to try the impossible because the alternative is giving up, Jake said quietly. 40 billion people are counting on us to find a way. Queen Zixandra found herself facing a choice that would define not just her reign, but possibly the future of her species. Her scientists were unified in their assessment that Jake's plan could not work. The risks were enormous, and failure would likely make the situation worse rather than better. Every logical analysis suggested they should focus on evacuation efforts. Instead, but she had watched these humans accomplish the impossible repeatedly over the past week. They had solved problems her best minds could not handle, overcome physical limitations that should have been absolute, and consistently found ways to create success where none should have existed. More importantly, they had never once suggested that her people should simply accept their losses. We attempt the human plan, she announced. The next 18 hours became the most intense of Queen Zixandra's long life. 12 Vorthic ships positioned themselves around the collapsing star, while Jake remained aboard her flagship, coordinating a plan that required split-second timing across light years of space. He could not directly observe what was happening at the other positions, could not adjust for changing conditions, and had no way to correct mistakes once the sequence began. Amy Chun piloted one of the coordination ships, her human reflexes somehow keeping pace with gravitational forces that changed faster than Vorthic minds could process. Kevin Brooks commanded another position, using tactical instincts to predict stellar behavior patterns that had never been documented before. Human specialists worked alongside Vorthic crew members, teaching them to think in ways that violated their training but somehow achieved better results. Beginning sequence, Jake announced. Remember, we're not just trying to stop the collapse. We're giving the star a new rhythm to follow. What happened next would be remembered in Vorthic history as the day their understanding of possibility changed forever. Jake's coordination was flawless, despite having no direct feedback from the other ships. The gravitational pulses synchronized with precision that should have required impossible timing. When unexpected solar flares threatened to disrupt the sequence, the human-trained crews adapted their rhythms without losing the overall pattern. The stellar collapse not only stopped, but reversed. The star stabilized into a configuration that was actually more stable than it had been before the crisis began. 40 billion lives were saved, and the stellar archive was preserved for future generations. Jake Morrison collapsed immediately after confirming the mission's success. The neural strain of coordinating such complex actions across impossible distances had pushed him beyond what human biology should have been able to handle. As he lay unconscious in the medical bay, Queen Zixandra finally understood what she had been witnessing. The peak is not a destination, she said to Dr. Velther as they watched the medical readouts. It is a philosophy. Humans do not reach their limits because they refuse to believe such limits exist. But surely there must be boundaries to what any species can achieve. The scientist protested. The Queen looked at the star system display showing her homeworld, safe and stable, because one human had refused to accept that 40 billion deaths were inevitable. Perhaps the only real limit is what we choose to accept as impossible. For the first time in 3,000 years, Queen Zixandra began to wonder what her own people might accomplish if they learned to think like humans. Queen Zixandra could not sleep during her first night aboard the human station. Her mind processed what she had witnessed over and over, searching for logical explanations that continued to elude her. By morning, she had reached a decision that surprised even herself. She would test these humans properly, under controlled conditions where their true limitations would become clear. "I wish to invite your people aboard my flagship," she announced to Captain Rodriguez during their morning meeting. "There are challenges I would like to present to them." Lisa exchanged glances with Jake Morrison, who had joined them for breakfast. "What kind of challenges, Your Majesty?" "Problems that have tested the greatest minds in my empire. Scenarios that reveal the true boundaries of any species' capabilities." The Queen's crystalline features remained neutral, but inside she felt something resembling anticipation. "I wish to understand how far human thinking can actually reach." Jake leaned forward with interest rather than concern. "That sounds fascinating. What did you have in mind?" "Strategic puzzles that took my war council months to solve. Mathematical theorems that required our most powerful computers. Physical challenges that would break most organic species." She paused, studying his reaction. "Are you willing to risk failure?" "Failure teaches us as much as success," Jake replied. "When do we start?" 3 hours later, Jake found himself aboard the Vorthik flagship alongside Amy Chun and a tactical specialist named Kevin Brooks. The ship was massive beyond human comprehension, its corridors stretching for kilometers in every direction. Everything was built from the same crystalline material as the Vorthik themselves, creating an environment that felt both beautiful and alien. General Thokmar led them to a chamber filled with holographic displays and complex control systems. "The first challenge," he announced, "is a military scenario that has puzzled our strategists for decades." The hologram showed a star system under siege. Enemy forces controlled the high ground around 3 planets, while civilians were trapped on the surface. Any rescue attempt would result in massive casualties among both the civilians and the rescue forces. The Vorthik solution had involved accepting the loss of 30% of the trapped population while saving the rest. "The mathematics are clear," Thokmar explained. "Some losses are inevitable in any rescue operation. The optimal solution minimizes total casualties." Jake studied the display for several minutes, his eyes moving constantly as he absorbed details. Amy and Kevin joined him, the 3 humans communicating in quick, quiet sentences that seemed almost like a private language. Queen Zixandra watched from her observation platform, waiting to see how long it would take them to reach the same conclusion as her military experts. Instead, Jake began manipulating the holographic controls in ways that made no sense. "What if we don't try to rescue them at all?" "That would result in total civilian losses," Thokmar pointed out. "No, I mean, what if we change the situation so they don't need rescuing?" Jake's fingers danced across the controls, showing troop movements that seemed random. "Amy, you're our best pilot. If we came in from this angle with maximum noise and visibility, what would the enemy do?" "They'd assume we're the main attack force and concentrate their defenses," Amy replied, understanding immediately. "Right. And Kevin, if you were commanding the defense of those planets and saw the enemy repositioning to meet our fake attack, what would you do?" Kevin grinned. "I'd use the opportunity to break out and join the fight instead of waiting to be rescued." What happened next amazed everyone watching. Instead of solving the rescue scenario as presented, the humans had rewritten it entirely. They turned the trapped civilians into active participants, used the enemy's tactical assumptions against them, and created a solution where everyone not only survived, but ended up in a stronger position than before the crisis began. "This is not the problem we gave you," General Thokmar protested. "It's a better problem," Jake replied simply. "Why accept bad choices when you can create good ones?" Queen Zixandra felt that familiar confusion rising again. Her military experts, had spent months analyzing every possible approach to the scenario. They had calculated optimal outcomes based on known variables and established tactical principles. The humans had ignored all of that and created variables that had not existed before. "The next challenge is mathematical," she announced, hoping. Logic would prove more definitive than strategy. Dr. Velther, her chief scientist, presented a theorem that had required the Empire's most advanced computers working for weeks to solve. It involved calculating probability cascades across multiple dimensional matrices, the kind of problem that typically broke organic minds attempting to hold all the variables simultaneously. Jake looked at the equations for less than a minute before shaking his head. "This is too complicated." "Exactly," Dr. Velther agreed. "Only our most sophisticated artificial intelligences can process the necessary calculations." "No, I mean it's too complicated because you're trying to solve everything at once." Jake began simplifying the display, breaking the massive equation into smaller components. "What if we solve the easy parts first and use those answers to make the hard parts easier?" That approach would introduce rounding errors that compound exponentially. The scientist objected. "Not if we're smart about which parts we solve first." Jake's hands moved with surprising speed, rearranging the mathematical relationships into patterns that seemed almost artistic. "Kevin, you're good with probability calculations. Can you handle this section while Amy works on the dimensional matrices?" Working together, the three humans began attacking the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. They made approximations that should have led to wildly inaccurate results, but somehow their errors canceled each other out. When they reached conclusions that contradicted their initial assumptions, they changed their approach instead of accepting the contradictions. "They are not solving the theorem," Dr. Velther whispered to the Queen. "They are rebuilding it into something solvable. Is their answer correct?" "Yes, but that should be impossible with their methods." The third challenge was physical. Queen Zixandra led the humans to a chamber where gravity could be adjusted and obstacles created from solid energy. The test had broken the bones of every organic species that attempted it, requiring levels of strength, endurance, and coordination that exceeded normal biological limits. "The goal is simple," she explained. "Reach the far end of the chamber. The path will become more difficult as you progress." Jake stretched his muscles and grinned at his companions. "Race you to the finish." What followed defied every assumption. The Queen heard about physical limitations. When the gravity increased beyond what human bones should withstand, Jake adjusted his movement style instead of his pace. When energy barriers appeared that should have been impossible to pass through, Amy found gaps that existed for only fractions of seconds. When the obstacles became too complex for any individual to navigate, the three humans began working as a single unit, each covering the other's weaknesses. Halfway through the course, Jake was struck by an energy discharge that should have paralyzed him. Instead of stopping, he incorporated the muscle spasms into his movement pattern, using the involuntary contractions to help him reach handholds that had been too far away. When Amy's legs gave out from exhaustion, Kevin carried her while she guided him through sections too complex for him to navigate alone. "They are exceeding their physical specifications," the Queen's medical advisor reported in amazement. "Their bodies should have failed completely by now. Yet they continue," Zixandra observed. The humans reached the end of the course in a condition that medical scans said should have been impossible. They were exhausted, injured, and operating on reserves. That should not have existed, but they were conscious, alert, and already asking about the next challenge. "How?" was all Queen Zixandra could ask. "We don't quit when things get hard," Jake replied, breathing heavily but smiling. "That's when things get interesting." The Queen stared at these impossible creatures who had just systematically violated every principle she understood about mental and physical limitations. They had not just passed her tests. They had demonstrated that the tests themselves were based on false assumptions about what was actually possible. For the first time in 3,000 years, Queen Zixandra began to wonder if she had been thinking too small about what life could achieve. The journey to Earth took Queen Zixandra's fleet 3 days. As they approached the small blue planet, her sensors painted a picture that confused her even more. The humans had detected her ships long before arrival, but instead of mobilizing their military or fleeing in panic, they had sent a single message: "Welcome to Earth. We have prepared a meeting place." "They show no fear," General Thokmar observed as they studied the human response. "Most species either attack immediately or surrender when faced with superior force." Zixandra watched the primitive human vessels moving to escort her fleet toward a space station orbiting their moon. The ships were crude but moved with purpose. "Perhaps they do not understand the difference in our capabilities." "The scans suggest otherwise, my queen. Their equipment may be basic, but it functions well enough to analyze our fleet's power. They know we could destroy their entire civilization without effort." The space station they approached was called Harmony, according to the human transmissions. It was small by galactic standards, clearly built for research rather than defense. As the Queen's shuttle docked, she wondered if this was some elaborate trap, but her sensors detected no hidden weapons, no energy buildups that might indicate an ambush. Captain Lisa Rodriguez waited in the docking bay to greet them. She was smaller than Zixandra had expected, with brown skin and dark hair that seemed to move on its own in the artificial gravity. When the Queen's party emerged from their shuttle, the human stepped forward without hesitation. "Your Majesty," Lisa said, offering what appeared to be a gesture of respect. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, Earth's primary xenobiologist. We're honored by your visit." The Queen studied this fragile creature who showed no sign of intimidation, despite being surrounded by beings who could crush her without effort. "You know who I am? We've heard of the Vorthic Empire. Your reputation for fairness and strength precedes you." Lisa gestured toward the station's interior. "We've prepared quarters for your party and arranged for translation systems. We hope to make your stay comfortable." As they walked through the station's corridors, Zixandra observed everything with growing bewilderment. The humans moved with easy confidence, their conversations flowing naturally, even in the presence of alien visitors. Children could be seen playing in recreational areas, completely unbothered by the historic nature of first contact. "Your people seem remarkably calm," the Queen commented. Lisa smiled. An expression the Queen had learned indicated pleasure or amusement. "We've been hoping for this day for a long time. Meeting other intelligent life is one of humanity's greatest dreams. Most species fear first contact. They worry about conquest or cultural contamination. Some of our people do too," Lisa admitted. "But fear never stopped us from exploring before. Besides, if you wanted to hurt us, you wouldn't have accepted our invitation to talk." This simple logic impressed the Queen. The human had assessed the situation and reached a reasonable conclusion without complex analysis or long deliberation. It suggested an intelligence that worked differently from what she was used to. They reached the station's main conference room, where several other humans waited. Lisa introduced them: Dr. Pete Collins, an engineer with graying hair and gentle eyes; Commander Amy Chun, a pilot whose alert posture suggested military training; and Jake Morrison, the man who had defeated the Kraxan fleet. Jake was not what Zixandra had expected. He was average height for a human, with brown hair and blue eyes that seemed to hold a constant spark of curiosity. When she had imagined the warrior who accomplished the impossible, she had pictured someone more imposing. Instead, Jake looked like he could be any human among billions. "Your Majesty," Jake said, extending his hand in what she had learned was a human greeting gesture. "Thank you for coming all this way." I hope we can learn from each other. The Queen studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda. She found only genuine interest in something else she could not identify. You are the one who fought the Cruxans. I stopped them from hurting innocent people, Jake replied simply. That's all. You destroyed an entire battle fleet, 200 ships. I disabled them. No one died. That was important to me. This distinction seemed crucial to Jake, though the Queen could not understand why. In galactic warfare, victory was victory. The method mattered far less than the result. Why risk your life for strangers? Jake appeared to consider the question seriously before answering. Because they needed help, and I was there to give it. Isn't that reason enough? Before the Queen could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Captain Rodriguez quickly moved to a communication panel where urgent voices reported a massive solar flare heading toward their position. The station's shields would not be enough to protect everyone aboard. How long do we have? Lisa asked. 18 minutes until the radiation wave hits, came the reply. We need to evacuate to the planet's surface. Not enough time, Pete Collins said, his fingers flying over a computer terminal. The shuttles can't make enough trips. We'd lose half the people on board. Zixandra watched the humans react to this crisis. Her own people would have immediately calculated the acceptable losses and proceeded with the most logical evacuation plan. Instead, the humans refused to accept that anyone had to die. What about reinforcing the shields? Amy Chun suggested. We'd need to reroute power from life support, Pete replied. But the calculations alone would take hours. Then we do it without calculations, Jake said, moving to another terminal. Pete, you know the station's power grid better than anyone. Amy, you understand radiation shielding from your pilot training. Lisa, your biological knowledge can help us figure out what level of protection we actually need. Jake, this is insane, Pete protested. You can't just guess your way through complex engineering. Watch me. Jake's fingers began working across multiple displays simultaneously. We don't have time to be perfect. We just need to be good enough. What happened next defied everything Queen Zixandra understood about problem solving. The humans began working together without formal plans or hierarchical commands. Jake somehow coordinated their efforts while simultaneously performing calculations that should have required specialized computers. Pete jury-rigged power connections using methods that violated standard safety protocols but seemed to work anyway. Amy reconfigured shield generators in ways that her training manual probably forbade. The Queen's own technical specialists watched in amazement as the humans accomplished in minutes what should have taken teams of experts hours to plan. When her science advisor whispered that the human approach was completely illogical, but somehow functional, she began to understand what she was witnessing. They are not calculating optimal solutions, she realized. They are creating solutions that did not exist before. The solar flare struck the station exactly 18 minutes later. The improvised shield modifications held. Every person aboard survived without injury. As the danger passed, the humans began laughing and embracing each other, celebrating their success with a joy that seemed completely natural. Jake walked over to where the Queen stood. Sorry about the excitement on your first visit. Things like this happen more often than we'd like. How did you know your solution would work? She asked. I didn't, Jake admitted. But I knew doing nothing definitely wouldn't work, so we had to try something. What if you had been wrong? Jake shrugged, another human gesture she was learning to interpret. Then we would have tried something else. Humans don't give up as long as people need help. Queen Zixandra felt that strange sensation again, the one she had experienced when first seeing the battle recordings. These creatures approached problems in ways that violated every logical principle she knew, yet somehow achieved results that Pure logic could not match. They seemed to create possibilities where none had existed before. For the first time in 3,000 years, she began to wonder if her understanding of limits might be incomplete. Queen Zixandra stood before the massive crystal screen that showed her empire stretching across the galaxy. 847 star systems bowed to her will. 3,000 years of rule had taught her that power came from knowing your limits and staying within them. The Vorthic way was simple. Understand what you could do it perfectly, and never waste energy trying to exceed your natural boundaries. Her silicon-based body gleamed under the pale blue lights of the throne room. Unlike the soft flesh of carbon-based life forms, her people were built to last. They lived for tens of thousands of years, thought with perfect logic, and never let emotions cloud their judgment. This was why they ruled while others served. My queen, General Thokmar, approached with his usual measured steps. His crystalline face showed no expression, as was proper. The scouts have returned from the outer rim with troubling news. Zixandra turned her attention to him. In 3 millennia, very little had truly troubled her. Speak. A Kraxan battle fleet was destroyed near the Terran sector. All 200 ships disabled. Crews alive, but unconscious. The fleet commander claims a single small vessel did this. The Queen's internal processors calculated the impossibility of this statement. The Kraxan were one of the most feared military forces in known space. Their ships carried weapons that could crack planets. Their crews were bred for war from birth. Impossible. What species commands such technology? That is the strange part. My queen, the vessel belonged to creatures called humans. Our databases show them as a primitive Type 1 civilization. They have barely left their home planet. They use chemical rockets and basic fusion drives. Zixandra felt something she had not experienced in centuries: confusion. Her logical mind rejected the data, but General Thokmar had never lied to her. Show me the recordings. The crystal screen shifted to display grainy footage from a Kraxan. Survivor, a small, ugly ship that looked like it was built from scrap metal, moved between the massive Kraxan vessels. It should have been destroyed in seconds. Instead, it danced. There was no other word for it. The human ship moved in ways that defied tactical sense, appearing in impossible positions, striking with precision that seemed almost organic rather than calculated. The Kraxan commander swears the human pilot was alone, Thokmar continued. No crew, no AI assistants, no enhancement trubs, just one being controlling the entire engagement. One being, the Queen repeated. In her empire, even the smallest. Battles required thousands of specialists working together. The idea of a single mind coordinating such complex maneuvers was beyond her understanding. There is more. My queen, our cultural databases contain references to something the humans call the peak. Old legends speak of it as a state where lesser beings somehow transcend their natural limitations. Zixandra had heard whispers of this myth throughout her long reign. Primitive species often created stories about achieving impossible things when faced with certain death. She had always dismissed them as the fantasies of beings too weak to accept reality. Myths created by species that refuse to acknowledge their own weaknesses. Perhaps, my queen, but this engagement suggests otherwise. The recording continued. The human ship took hits that should have destroyed it, yet kept fighting. When a Kraxan dreadnought attempted to ram it, expecting an easy kill, the small vessel somehow slipped past the massive ship's shields and disabled its main reactor with a single precise shot. The entire battle lasted 18 minutes. When it ended, not a single Kraxan was dead, but their entire fleet was helpless. What did the Kraxans say about their opponent? Zixandra asked. They claimed the human broadcast a message during the battle. He said he would not let them harm the civilian transport they were hunting. When they told him he was outnumbered and should surrender, he responded that numbers did not matter when you were protecting people who could not protect themselves. The Queen processed this information. Sacrifice for others was not unknown in the galaxy, but it was typically calculated. Species protected their own kind because it served their survival. But these humans had risked everything for strangers. Were the civilians of their species? No, my Queen. The transport carried Zilithian refugees. The humans and Zilithians have never even met before this incident. This made even less sense. Zixandra ruled through clear hierarchies and mutual benefit. Species served her because she protected them from others. They followed logical contracts based on fear and reward. But humans apparently fought impossible odds for beings they did not even know, expecting nothing in return. Bring me all data on these humans, she commanded. I want to know everything about their world, their technology, their capabilities. It has already been compiled, my Queen. Thokmar gestured, and files appeared on the crystal screen. Planet Earth, third from their sun, population 8 billion. They have been spacefaring for less than 200 years. Their fastest ships take months to travel distances our vessels cross in hours. They have no unified government, no advanced AI, no genetic enhancement programs. Zixandra studied the data. By every measure, humans should be irrelevant. They were short-lived, physically weak, and technologically primitive. Their planet was a chaos of competing nations that spent more energy fighting each other than exploring space. Yet somehow, one of them had defeated a Kraxan fleet. There must be hidden technology, she decided. Some weapon or defense system our sensors missed. Our analysis found none, my Queen. The human ship used conventional engines, basic projectile weapons, and simple electronic warfare. Nothing we have not seen from dozens of other primitive species. The Queen felt that unfamiliar sensation again. In 3,000 years of rule, she had learned to categorize every species, every threat, every possibility. Humans did not fit into any category she understood. I want to meet this human who defeated the Kraxans. My Queen, surely that is beneath your attention. We could send an ambassador, or perhaps a research team. No. Zixandra's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. If these creatures possess some unknown capability, I must understand it myself. Prepare my personal fleet. We journey to Earth. General Thokmar's crystalline features showed the slightest hint of concern. My Queen, if they could defeat the Kraxans, might they not be dangerous to you as well? The Queen considered this. Fear was not an emotion her people experienced in the same way as organic species, but she understood caution. However, curiosity was stronger. In 3 millennia, nothing had truly surprised her. These humans had done something that should have been impossible, and she needed to know how. If they intended conquest, they would have pursued the Kraxan fleet and taken prisoners. Instead, they helped the wounded and disappeared back to their home system. This suggests they are not aggressors. She paused, running calculations, but prepared the fleet for combat anyway. If these humans have found a way to exceed their natural limits, I must understand whether this represents an opportunity or a threat to the Empire. As her commands were carried out, Queen Zixandra found herself thinking about the concept of the peak for the first time in centuries. Every species she had ever encountered had clear boundaries. When they reached their maximum capability, they stopped. It was a law of nature as reliable as gravity or entropy. But if the reports were true, humans seemed to ignore this law entirely. Thought both fascinated and disturbed her. If beings could truly transcend their limitations, what did that mean for the order she had spent 3,000 years building? And more importantly, how far beyond their limits could they actually go? Soon she would have her answers. Jake Morrison woke up 3 days later in a medical bay that hummed with technology beyond his understanding. His head felt like someone had been using it as a drum, and his vision took several minutes to focus properly. When he finally sat up, he found Queen Zixandra sitting beside his bed, her crystalline features reflecting the soft medical lights. "You saved my people," she said simply. 40 billion lives continue because you refused to accept their deaths as inevitable. Jake rubbed his temples, trying to remember the details of the stellar stabilization. Did it work? Is everyone safe? More than safe. The star is now more stable than it was before the crisis began. Our scientists are calling it impossible, but they cannot argue with the results. The Queen paused, studying his face. "You nearly died doing something that should have killed you long before you succeeded." "Nearly dying isn't the same as dying," Jake replied with a weak smile. "Besides, people needed help. That's always worth the risk." Queen Zixandra had spent the past 3 days thinking about those words. In her empire, citizens served the state because it was logical and beneficial. Loyalty was a contract based on mutual advantage. But humans seemed to operate on entirely different principles. They risked everything for strangers, fought impossible odds to protect others, and never calculated whether their sacrifice was worthwhile. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. You have no advanced weapons, no genetic enhancements, no technology that exceeds what dozens of other species possess. Yet you consistently accomplish things that should be impossible. How?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I think it's because we don't spend much time thinking about what should be impossible. When something needs to be done, we focus on finding a way to do it rather than reasons why it can't be done. But surely you must recognize that some things have absolute limitations." "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But we've found that most things people call impossible are just things nobody has figured out how to do yet. The word impossible usually means we haven't been creative enough or tried hard enough." This conversation was interrupted by General Thokmar entering the medical bay. His usually composed demeanor showed signs of agitation. "My queen, we have received urgent communications from the Outer Rim. The attacks have begun again." "What? Attacks?" Jake asked, sitting up straighter despite his headache. Queen Zixandra's expression darkened. "For the past year, colonies throughout the outer sectors have been attacked by unknown forces. Ships appear from nowhere, strike without warning, then vanish completely. We have lost contact with 17 worlds. Our best military minds have studied the attack patterns for months," General Thokmar continued. "The technology appears to be extradimensional in nature. The attackers exist partially outside normal space, making them nearly impossible to detect or engage. Interdimensional warfare is theoretically impossible," the Queen added. "Our scientists insist that no species could develop such capabilities." Jake swung his legs over the side of the medical bed, ignoring the protests from the monitoring equipment. "Can I see the attack data?" "Jake, you just nearly died," Amy Chun said as she entered the medical bay. "The doctor said you need at least a week of rest." "People are being attacked by something everyone says is impossible," Jake replied, standing up despite obvious dizziness. "That sounds like exactly the kind of problem humans are good at solving." 3 hours later, Jake stood in the Queen's command center studying holographic displays of the mysterious attacks. Amy and Kevin had joined him, along with Captain Rodriguez and several other human specialists who had arrived aboard the fastest Earth vessels. The attack patterns were unlike anything in known military doctrine. "They're not following any logic." "We understand," General Thokmar explained. "Sometimes they attack heavily defended military installations. Other times they target peaceful research colonies. There's no apparent strategic value to their choices." "What if strategy isn't the point?" Amy suggested. What if they're testing something? Jake nodded, his fingers moving across the control displays. These aren't conquest attacks. Look at timing patterns. They strike, observe the response, then disappear. They're learning how we fight. Learning for what purpose? The Queen asked. Maybe they're preparing for something bigger, Kevin said grimly. A real invasion force that would know exactly how to counter every defense we have. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this possibility. An enemy that could attack from outside normal space, while learning their defensive capabilities, would be nearly impossible to defeat using conventional tactics. We need to make contact with them, Jake announced. Contact? General Thokmar's voice carried disbelief. They have attacked 17 worlds without any attempt at communication. Then we need to give them a reason to communicate, Jake replied. What if we show them something they don't expect? Something that makes them curious instead of hostile? Queen Zixandra felt that familiar sensation she had learned to associate with human thinking. What do you propose? We stop trying to fight them and start trying to understand them. Instead of defending against their attacks, we meet them in open space and offer to talk. That would be suicide, General Thokmar protested. We have no way to protect ourselves if they choose to attack. Sometimes the only way to show peaceful intentions is to be genuinely peaceful, Jake said. If they're as advanced as they seem, they'll recognize that we're taking a huge risk to communicate with them. The Queen considered this proposal. Every military principle she knew advised against exposing valuable assets to unknown threats. But she had learned that human approaches often succeeded precisely because they violated conventional wisdom. I will go with you, she announced. My Queen. That is absolutely unacceptable, General Thokmar said immediately. The risk to your person would be enormous. The risk of continuing these attacks is even greater, she replied. Besides, I have learned that humans accomplish impossible things more easily when they know people are counting on them. 2 days later, a small fleet consisting of Vorthic ships and human vessels approached the last known attack site. Instead of weapons, they carried communications equipment and cultural artifacts from dozens of species. Jake's plan was simple. Make it clear they wanted to talk, not fight. Unknown vessels detected, Amy reported from her pilot station. There. Not showing up on normal sensors, but I can see them. How can you see them if the sensors cannot? Queen Zixandra asked. Human eyes sometimes notice things machines miss, Amy replied. There are patterns in space that look wrong, like something is hiding there. Jake opened a communication channel on all frequencies. This is Jake Morrison, representing Earth and the Vorthic Empire. We know you've been observing our colonies. We'd like to understand why and see if we can find a peaceful solution. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to shift, and ships that existed partially outside normal reality became visible. They were beautiful and terrifying, built from materials that seemed to flow like liquid while maintaining solid form. Why do you not defend yourselves? The voice that answered came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in harmonics that bypassed normal translation systems and spoke directly to their minds. Because we're not here to fight, Jake replied. We're here to learn. Your technology is amazing, and we'd like to understand what you're trying to accomplish. We study species that show potential for growth beyond their current limitations. Your responses to our tests have been ... unexpected. Queen Zixandra realized what had been happening. The attacks were not attacks at all. They were examinations. Correct. Most species respond to unknown threats with fear and aggression. You responded with curiosity and attempts at communication. This suggests capacity for evolution beyond typical patterns. What kind of evolution? Jake asked. The kind that allows beings to transcend the boundaries they believe define them. the kind that turns impossible into inevitable. The conversation that followed changed the future of galactic civilization. The extra-dimensional beings, who called themselves the Gardeners, had been watching species throughout the galaxy for millions of years. They searched for races that showed potential to grow beyond their current limitations and join a community of advanced civilizations that existed across multiple dimensions of reality. Most species reach a peak and stop growing, the Gardener explained. They become satisfied with their achievements and lose the drive to exceed their own expectations. But humans, and now Vorthik, who learned from humans, show different patterns. What patterns? Queen Zixandra asked. You refuse to accept that peaks exist at all. You treat every limitation as a temporary obstacle rather than a permanent boundary. This suggests potential for growth that has no theoretical endpoint. Jake looked at the Queen with a grin that had become familiar over their weeks together. Sounds like an invitation to me. Indeed it is, the Gardener replied. But first, you must prove you can work together as true partners rather than dominant and subordinate species. Queen Zixandra felt something she had never experienced in 3,000 years of rule. Excitement about an uncertain future. Looking at Jake Morrison, the human who had shown her that impossible,